Having a runny nose, sore throat, and headache is one thing, but having tuberculosis and being separated from your family is something totally different. In the 1900s, Dr. Charles Fox Gardner, became somewhat of a hero in the state of Colorado. I worked at the Glockner Sanatorium in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I became a hero because I developed a temporary cure for tuberculosis that first broke out in 1902. I called it the fresh air cure. Decided to design teepee-like homes or huts to keep patients isolated and prevent them from infecting other people with tuberculosis. Huts were usually in the shape of an octagon, steam heated, and they were green or white when the first couple were built. In the 20th century, tuberculosis became the biggest cause of death, and that was my worst nightmare. So many people contracted this disease and found out that Colorado was the place to get cured. Because of that, doctors and nurses became overwhelmed. The sanatoriums usually held about 12,000 patients, but with tuberculosis huts, the capacity was only 1. That meant that thousands and thousands of my huts had to be built. I worked at the Glockner Sanatorium for years. As more and more people came to my sanatorium, I knew I had to build more huts and sanatoriums to really keep the sick and the non-sick separated. Until I could get the huts and hospitals built, I used bells as marks on people to separate those who had tuberculosis and those who didn't. During this time, my colleague Peter Oliver Hanford and I had no answer, so we passed a milk ordinance. It said no milk could be sold in the springs except on bottles or other original packages, and no milk or skim milk could be sold in Colorado Springs except from cows that had been tuberculin tested within 12 months. As doctors began blaming cows for the spreading of tuberculosis, 15 to 20 million people died in the United States. Doctors then began to think that people living in unsanitary conditions were also the cause of tuberculosis. Colorado has held the international reputation of being the greatest health resort in the world. It is known that the atmosphere is aseptic and free from germ life. Doctors who specialized in the treatment of tuberculosis sent patients here to Colorado. Not only did I believe that fresh air would cure people with the tuberculosis disease, but my colleagues and I have also thought that anyone who changed the regimen of their life to sunshine, wholesome food and rest, and regular hours were very likely to get well. Sanatoriums were places where tuberculosis-infected people could get better and cured without infecting other people. Some places in Colorado were in Boulder at the Mesa Ridge Sanatorium. They treated all stages of tuberculosis in any form, and they treated blacks in separate cottages. At my sanatorium and other hospitals that treated tuberculosis, the capacity held 35 adults and 5 children, and admission was $10 to $25 per week. Another place more familiar today was the St. Francis Hospital. All stages of tuberculosis were admitted, but blacks were admitted in a different ward. The capacity for treating tuberculosis was 70 maximum patients, and admission was $14 to $40 per week. Another thing I came across when working was that children who often contracted tuberculosis suffered from loss of energy, poor appetite, loss of weight, and fever. I also noticed that the adults had vague chest pains and listlessness. Listlessness is lack of energy, no enthusiasm, showing no interest in anything, and lack of spirit. Almost like when recovering from a cold, you lay around all day and you're disinterested in everything. As of 2001, the state of Colorado had 138 new cases of tuberculosis. Colorado Springs was chosen to host a national tuberculosis exhibit. The governor then decided that November 1st, 1909 would be Anti-Tuberculosis Sunday. What made things worse was that non-tuberculosis infected people cried out to disinfect all public telephones every day and close down open-air markets where fruits and vegetables were displayed for sale. They believed that the items were collecting all the dust that blows and the bugs in the dust. So not only was I treating sick patients, but everyone was complaining. I also had people infected with tuberculosis, often referred to as lungers. A pastor of St. Leo's Church in Denver told these people to learn to observe the established rules of hygiene or leave town, and when these people fled town, they came here to Colorado. I felt more relaxed and I was able to concentrate more once these people left, but I also felt guilty for letting these people leave, knowing that if they left, they would soon return with tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is an inflammatory disease that mostly affects the lungs. Most doctors were infected one at a time and were continually infected time and time again from patients they came in close contact with. The primary form of tuberculosis presents any symptom like when catching a head cold or the flu. Secondary form is a reinfection when the immune system and the body's other defenses fail. But even today, there is still no serious cure for tuberculosis. The death rates have decreased and better treatment has also developed since then. Tuberculosis was one of the biggest epidemics in history. It was the biggest cause of death in the 20th century. Charles Fox Gardner did all he could to find a cure for these people.